it's Joe Partavilla. Thanks for clicking the latest episode of the Forbes Books podcast. And the pandemic has pushed organizations in every industry to embrace new digital solutions. But unfortunately, you can't Harry Potter or Jedi mind trick your way to successfully transform your business digitally. You need your very own Dumbledore or Yoda. Today, I'm joined by Sri Manchala, the CEO of Trianz, a global digital transformation consulting and technology services firm, and the author of the book, Crossing the Digital Fault Line. Hello, Sri.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Fantastic. And my first question is going to be right out of the box. I'm sure you're super proud of the book you put out with Forbes Books, Crossing the Digital Fault Line. But I want to start with something super basic. Why a book? Why were you inspired to write a book? Because I know as a CEO of a company, you're probably pretty busy and don't have a lot of downtime. So why was a book so important for you?
This journey actually started about 3 years ago when we, as a firm, started researching digital transformations worldwide. And the intent at that point in time was to collect a lot of data about how these transformations are taking place across the globe, learn about it, and make sure that our approaches are really well baked in as we try to help clients. We launched what is called as the Tracers Global Digital Transformation Survey. We ended up collecting data from about 5,000 plus companies. In all, around 10,000 executives participated in it. That research obviously helped us understand where transformations are, how these executives see the transformations, how they're prioritizing their investments in a very constrained sort of an environment, the technology aspect of the whole thing, and what it really takes to succeed in these implementations. And so we ended up refocusing our business. We ended up creating a completely different services portfolio and the way we engage clients. We became much more data-driven in that process. But what stood out for me as we double-clicked into the data is that only about 7% of companies succeed. When we dug deeper into it, we found that the single biggest differentiating factor in the success of the 7% really is leadership. And so the motivation really came out of this research and the insights that we gathered out of it.
Interesting. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're sort of mixing the intangible with the tangible. You have this tangible data and then sort of the intangible aspect of leadership. How do you merge those together so they're applicable to people? Because data is easy. People just read them like, all right, cool, this is working here, this is working there. But when it comes to leadership, it's very much in that intangible space of doing and saying the right thing, reading the room, all of that. So how do you merge that together?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I would say that when we identified leadership as one of the biggest drivers of success, we arrived at that also through a statistical analysis. We essentially looked at 8 or 9 different factors, as sort of contributing variables that we tried to map to the success of digital transformations. And leadership sort of stood out in a couple of different ways. One is the IQ that leaders demonstrate. Number 2 is the amount of investment that leaders make into preparing themselves as well as their teams, etc. So we sort of arrived at leadership as being the number one factor that drives transformations in somewhat of a quantified way. But as we started digging down into what these leaders do, again, we were able to make some data-driven connections on the things that leaders focus on. Sort of the rule book or the playbook that they follow over and over and over. So while there are certain aspects of digital leadership that are intangible, especially the soft aspects, there are also a big portion of their arsenal of techniques that are pretty well data-driven and very well quantifiable.
Interesting. And so I would love to know if you either motivated, changed by all of this data and information you collected. Because one thing is for you to be taking the 30,000-foot view of like, okay, I'm collecting all this data. Here's what it will help leaders. Here are the numbers. But then in the back of your mind, you're also a leader. You're running a company. So was there something there that actually helped you as well?
Very deep questions, Joe.
Yeah.
this is where I myself was experiencing what I really wrote in the book. What happens is that when you learn about these transformations in a more structured sort of a format, what are they? What's driving them? What's the sequence? What are the patterns? What's going to be in my control? What's not going to be in my control, etc. There comes a point of revelation because as a leader, you're always mapping what you're doing today, what the future is going to look like, and what is it that you do today which is going to be relevant, and what does it have to be replaced by? And so when that revelation sort of comes and hits you, it's a moment of truth. And you have to sort of dig really deep inside and ask yourself, now that I understand what the future is going to look like, and I also understand the change that is required from where I am today, the status quo, to the future, do I personally have the courage? Do I have the team? Do I have the assets that are required? And am I willing to undertake this journey to really transform? And so, at a personal level, I sort of went through this moment, I would say at some point in mid to late 2019. Ironically, that's when I had finished the first draft of the book as well. And so the book, in many ways, very systematically put the story of transformations and how leaders have to confront the new reality and the approach that they want to take. And once that did come and hit me, it sort of started two or three parallel streams. One stream obviously was to help our firm do things better. Number two is it spawned this effort to write the book and help other leaders who are confronting this challenge as well. But then third, it made me question my own vision and my own strategy for Trianz. So 2 years later, we are probably 60 to 70% of the way of implementing what I talk about in the book. And in the book, one of the most important things that we take away is the definition of digital transformation.
Wow. And you took the words out of my mouth about the fact that you've sort of defined the term digital transformation. So for the layperson who's not, Sri Manchala, how do you define that digital transformation?
See, I think that the tech industry has, maybe well-intentioned or maybe to hype up technology or maybe to help companies find the shortest way, have somehow equated digital transformation with digital technologies, i.e., if you do this or if you buy this technology or you jump into this headlong, you will come out at the other end transformed. And what the data shows us in terms of successful leaders, companies that have really achieved the results that they were targeting out of these transformations, technology is just a vehicle. It isn't the end in itself, but it's a vehicle, it's a tool, it's a bridge to go from where you are to the future. After a lot of thinking and writing and rewriting and validating with a bunch of people within the organization as well as participants in our survey, the way we describe digital transformations in one line is as follows. Digital transformation is the reimagination of a company's products and services and value propositions. And it is the reinvention of the experiences that the company delivers to all stakeholders, that is, customers, partners, regulators, influencers, and employees. That is the one-line definition of digital transformation.
And you know what I love about the way you write too, Sri, is the fact that this is really complex stuff, but you write it in such a conversational manner. How important was that to you as to you just not writing a book that as only, geniuses would be able to consume, but basically anyone who's interested in digital transformation can learn from your book?
Joe, it's a great question. The first draft of the book was a little bit complex, and it had a little bit more of the technology and those nuances than I would have liked. But then we started working on it, and I took a first-person approach, i.e., I put myself in the shoes of the reader. I stopped being Sri, and I became the reader. I became my own customer. And I tried to understand what Sri was trying to say in very, very simple terms. And so therefore, I realized that we have to make the book very conversational. We have to use language and examples and data in a way that people can comprehend very complex concepts in very simple and easy sort of terms. And so that's how we kept simplifying it and simplifying it. And what you have in front of you is really a very simple narrative of what transformations are, what the rules are, what's the personality that leaders ought to have, and how they can go about changing themselves and their teams.
And it's funny, the book is a metaphorical fault line crossing the digital fault line, but you open it up by talking about a literal fault line in Tokyo. Can you take us back to that story?
Yeah, that's the dates in March 11, 12, 13. They are of 2011. They are etched in my mind forever. We were out in Japan to demonstrate a major software platform that we had built for clients in the pharma industry. Essentially, that platform helps companies put drugs through clinical trials. We were working with a very large organization. We had demonstrated this to their units in Europe, in North America, and then we were covering Asia. And we were supposed to be in Japan and in Shanghai, in China. And so there we were on the very second day after we landed. This earthquake started around 1:30 in the afternoon. The computers just stopped working from an internet perspective. The connectivity was lost. It's exactly as I describe in the book. The buildings were trembling and things were flying off the shelves. Tables and things as heavy as refrigerators were shaking, and it was a massive sort of an earthquake. We stepped out when it calmed down. We came back in, and it started again. And it was even worse than what we imagined. And there were things that were happening around us, which fundamentally alter your reality. When these massive plates shift, the ground on which we stand almost feels like rubber. And your established behavior around gravity changes. You see these 100 plus story buildings, big towers, they are slowly shaking, and you can see that. The idea that a tall building as massive as that can shake isn't in our minds. The idea that 20 to 30 million people can be on the streets at the same time is something that is very hard to grasp. The idea that all transportation and everything can come to a grinding halt at the same time isn't something that we are used to. That experience that we went through in those 24 hours sort of stood out in my mind as a very brief point in time where all the fundamentals change simultaneously. You're soaking it in, you're trying to absorb it, you're trying to process it, and it is very, very difficult to process all of that because you're looking at everything from a paradigm and a set of conditions that you're familiar with. When you're on a fault line, all of those conditions are put into question. And that's why that metaphor, became very interesting for me when writing this book, because I believe that we are all on a fault line. The fundamentals in everything that we do from a business perspective and what we witness are going through as big a change as sort of what I went through in Tokyo. And that's why I thought that, okay, that could be an interesting title to describe the book.
And from one life-changing moment to another, the earthquake, to then COVID-19 and the pandemic, and somehow, Sri, even though your book came out in September 2020, you were able to include elements of COVID into the book. So tell me about that and how that came about.
Well, I think that when I wrote the first draft, the first edition of the book, COVID was still in the very, very early stages. I had no idea that we were on a massive discontinuous shift due to digital transformations from a business perspective. But it was very hard to sort of envision what effect COVID would have and what life would look like coming out at the other end. And so in the first attempt, there is just a brief touch on how COVID might sort of impact. But in this edition that we came out with Forbes, what I did was to analyze that a little bit more systematically because we had seen COVID for almost a year. We have seen data on what COVID is doing to industries, to businesses, and digital transformation as a whole. So, what I've done in the book is in each of the four parts, I have sort of described the COVID effect on that particular theme of transformation. So, in this edition that has come out, the analysis of COVID and its impact is quite systematic.
So, Sri, we've discussed the narrative style of the book, talking about how you started with a literal fault line and then working your way into the metaphorical one. So, how does that style play out for anyone who hasn't read it yet?
Yeah, so crossing the digital fault line is really about becoming a digital leader. And what I try to do is to take the reader through a journey where I use the fault line metaphor to describe the conditions in which all leaders find themselves today, regardless of the industry or the region or the country that they are in. Okay, so part one of the book really is about breaking down the forces that are causing this earthquake and helping people understand that there is a method to this madness. There is a method to why and what and how digital transformations are taking place around us and what the variables are that we have to focus on. In part two, I talk about the 10 rules that make successful leaders do really, really well. If you recall earlier in the interview, I said only 7% of companies or 7% of leaders really succeed. And so what we try to do is to analyze the data that we had at our disposal to codify the habits, the practices, the methods, the techniques that these leaders use over and over. And that's how I was able to identify 10 rules of successful leaders in digital transformation. As I finished, that portion, I said, well, to be able to come up with these kinds of techniques and use them in a repeated way requires a certain persona. It requires a certain mindset. And in part three, therefore, I very quickly analyze what kinds of leadership models are out there. For example, you have very highly democratic leaders who try to build consensus. Then you have transformative leaders who are very charismatic and they'll stand on a stage and can motivate 1 million people at one time. And so on. So there are different kinds of leadership models. And what I found is that the combination of skills that are required for someone to be successful in this digital age are quite unique, and they don't quite fit into any of the stereotypes that are well known in the leadership circles. And therefore, I was able to craft a persona called the methodical innovator. And that's a central theme in the book. The methodical innovator is a certain mindset, it's an acquired mindset where these leaders are very calm, they're very disciplined, they soak in information, they soak in data, and over a period of time, they're very, very highly data informed in their decision making. They stay the course, they're very patient, and they carry their teams. They realize very quickly that the key to transforming their company is to transform their people. And the point around the methodical innovator persona really is that it is an acquired taste, like you acquire taste for a certain food or a certain drink. This is also an acquired persona. Nobody is sort of born with this persona. What it also means is that everybody has an opportunity to learn and build the skills and the techniques of the 7% of leaders who have been successful. And then I said, well, if we have described the persona, how about creating a little playbook for leaders to implement a change personally and also take their teams along with them. And so we end with part four, which is a playbook for personal transformation.
And Sri, you're based out of the Silicon Valley, the world of, move fast and break things and be the first on board on anything. How do you toe that line of being methodical and moving fast? And I know this is probably a tough question, but it's like, especially in the world that you live in, it's all about speed. How do you combine speed with a methodical approach?
Well, Joe, you really bring up an interesting point, which I got reminded of, is that the tech industry has more or less not mastered, but it is very, very good at doing the things that we talk about in the book. But my hope really is that the book will be of value to leaders who are not in the tech industry. Why is that? Because all these rules that I described, the earthquake itself is the creation of the tech industry. It's everybody else who is affected by it. And so, in many ways, the tech industry has an unfair advantage. And that's why we find the tech industry encroaching quite systematically, one by one, other industries as well. We have seen that in retail, we have seen that in digital commerce, we're now going to see that in healthcare, pharma, and auto, and so on and so forth, and in other industries as well. So, one of my attempts really is to help leaders who are not in the tech industry understand these transformations in as non-technical terms as possible. So that really is our audience. And having said so, while there's a lot of hype around how fast-paced tech is, and how it breaks things very quickly and then rebuilds them quickly, etc., at the next level, when leaders in other industries start adopting the techniques that have made the tech industry successful, they will see that speed and technique can both go together, right? That's why we have Formula One racing. That's why we can see that in Indy 500. Just because they drive really fast, it doesn't mean they are chaotic, right? Accidents do happen for sure, but the best drivers know how to do things really fast while using a particular technique. And that's the point in the book as well, that you can do things fast, but at the same time, you can be quite systematic. And you get to that speed not overnight, but you get to that speed over iterations. You change gears, from one phase to another phase to another phase, and then you start driving really fast.
If you had one key takeaway that you wanted someone to walk away from their book after reading, what would it be? And I know this is super oversimplifying a book that's several hundred pages long, but as the author, what do you want people to take away from the book?
Look, my message to all established leaders and aspiring leaders who are wrestling with this challenge is really as follows. All this digital stuff, these technologies, and this transformation is our creation. We created these things. And so therefore, the first thing is we need to be really calm and take a very structured approach to understand what's going on. Once we have understood what's going on, focus on the rules and create a playbook for yourself and follow those rules on a repeat basis and keep improving on it. And number three is that in order to be successful as a leader in digital transformation, there's a certain persona that's required, and anybody who has the right sort of experience and the right capabilities can acquire this personality and can be successful, at transformation. So understand the technique, understand the method. And once you know what the rules are and what the persona is, and you start practicing that over and over, I have absolutely no doubt that the reader or the leaders can become very successful digital leaders. That's the technique that I've followed, and we're reaping the benefits of it today. And I believe that every leader can become a successful digital leader.
And Sri, let's dive a little bit into your evolution as a leader, because you come from India's armed forces, where you served in the infantry and the parachute regiment. So how did that form your style as a leader?
Well, those nearly 10 years that I spent in the academy and in service essentially laid the foundation for several leadership techniques that at this point in my career, and I actually talk about a lot of these in the context of the book as well. But I would say that we learned the fundamentals of being bold and being able to face reality square-chested and seeing it for what it is and not for what we want it to be. That's kind of what digital transformations are. You cannot wish them away. You cannot imagine them to be something else. You may not like what you see, but you have to see, what's sort of staring in front of you. You have to be able to deconstruct a lot of the unknowns, and that's a skill that we learn in the military. You have to be able to organize yourself very, very quickly and prioritize. So crossing the digital fault line is also a leadership metaphor in the sense that a leader's first job when in crisis is to lead their teams to safety. And so when you cross the fault line, you're away from the danger zone and you have better control over your destiny. Leadership is also about taking the first steps yourself, leading by example, and persevering through those unknowns and uncertainties. And that is also something the military sort of teaches you. But when you start, following those well-established and age-old techniques your teams follow, and when you get past the fault line, you start getting your destiny under control. You are in a much more composed state of mind. The pace is a little bit slower. The variables are under control, and then you start charting the next phases of transformation. So my evolution into all of this really has been in sort of three phases. The first phase really was in my service in the military, but I was very fortunate to come to the US and received an admission at the University of Southern California, where I did an MBA for leaders. Then in the second phase, I spent a lot of time consulting for very large clients out here in Silicon Valley and globally. And that sort of got me really deep into technology. And in the third phase, when I started Trianz about 18 years ago, I was able to apply both. And so the evolution in all of these three phases has sort of built what I would call as layers of experience, which I am able to sort of dip into, a reservoir, if you may. And that's how, I have been able to transform our company. And those are the things that I talk about in the book as well. Of course, not as a lecture, but really laced in different parts of the book so that a particular point in the book is highlighted with an example and a leadership technique that can be used to solve that problem or harness that opportunity.
His name is Sri Manchala. He is the CEO of Trianz and the author of the new book, Crossing the Digital Fault Line. Thank you, Sri.
Thank you, Joe. It's been an excellent experience speaking with you.
Thanks, Sri, and that is it for this edition of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get the new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.